You were on there already.
Gotcha, right. Beautiful.
Okay. So now we are holding Siman Shin Gimel 313 in the Alter Rebbe. And I guess what we'll do is as usual. I guess I'll read and you'll do the notes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, so the cork of a window, meaning a window plug, and like a board or any other thing that you close the window off with. Even if it's not something that has the laws of a movable object, or not a movable object, but a vessel, actually, because a movable object could be a vessel or it could just be a stick or a stone. So like a stick or a stone is not a vessel, but even if something like that does not have the laws of a vessel, and you also you've never stuffed up this window, you've never covered the window with this item in the weekdays. And he comes. I like how the Alter Rebbe actually goes a little bit further and specifies the situation very, very carefully and clearly here. And now it's Shabbos, and you come the first time to use this item to close a window. So if you thought already about it during the day that you were going to use this on Shabbos to close the window, or you just had in mind that you will use this item as a window covering, even though you didn't specify specifically that you're going to do it on Shabbos, but you designated it, this thing I will use to cover windows. Hariz mutter, you're allowed to use it now. Shal yedei machshavazu yarda olav teiras kli, because through this thought, it now has taken on the characteristics, the rules, the laws of a vessel. Right before he said, even if it's not a vessel beforehand. Why? Because there's problems with something that's not a vessel, like we learned before. And maybe I'll talk about this in the notes. Is that there's two things, and one of them, does it look like baina? Does it look like building? And the second thing is muktzah, is something that's like a stick or a stone or just a board that's not a vessel. Even though there's different kinds of vessels and there's different, depending on its use, the rules change, right? Because if you have a vessel that's leheter, it has a permissible use, you can use it any way at all, pretty much. Obviously, as long as you're not doing something forbidden with it. And then you have a kli that's melachti le'isur, meaning a vessel that has a forbidden use, like you spoke about before, the olive mixing thing. Since you're not allowed to do that olive mixing on Shabbos, so you're not allowed to use the olive mix. So olive mixing stick is a kli shemalachti le'isur. It's a forbidden kli. Okay, but even a forbidden kli, you're allowed to use it for a secondary use, right? What is it, machmas gufi or machmas mekaymi, or for its place? But you just can't use it machmas atzma. You can't use it for its own benefit, meaning like to hide it somewhere, to put it away, to do something for its own benefit. But you still can use it for a secondary permissible use, and you can still use it for because you need the space that it's occupying. But then if something is not a vessel at all, it's completely muktzah. You cannot move it for any purpose, even for another purpose. So that's another concern. So in this case, if you had in mind that you are going to, before Shabbos, that you're going to use it either for this window or in general for windows, it is now considered a vessel. And you're allowed to carry it, or you're allowed to move it just like any other vessel. Like it was explained in 308. That thinking helps a thing, at least in any item that it's usual to designate it with thought. You can designate it with thought, which is interesting. If you remember, there was a machlokes of if you can designate it with thought. I think it was the Rosh and the Rif maybe, but that I think it was the Rosh that held that you can designate it with thought. Don't quote me on this because I may be having it backwards. And I think the Rif held that you cannot designate it with thought; it has to have been used once before. Whereas the Rosh holds that actually the Rosh even holds that designating in thought is better than even having used it before, which is an interesting one because how did he use it before without thinking about it? But anyways, so the Alter Rebbe here holds obviously like the Rosh, I think it is that you can designate with thought. The impakak by pam achas mi beidiyain. And if you used it to close the window one time when it was still day, meaning prior to Shabbos, av shaloi chashav alav livkek by Shabbos, even though you didn't think that you were think about using it on Shabbos, yarda alav teiras kliyad kikazud. That does so it doesn't make a difference. You've designated it by the fact that you've used it. You've designated it. So even if you did not. Even if you did not think about it and say, "Oh, I'm going to use this for this purpose," but the fact that you used it, it also became a vessel through its use. Because this is one of the ways of designating it. Commission is by Sham, like explained in 308. Should we do the notes on this first part? Because now it's going to go to
I think so.
ceiling.
Yeah. I think it's a whole other.
Yeah, so let's. It's related, but it's already a new.
So we start off saying, plug in a window. So we're talking from he just explains a little background from Gemara Shabbos that back then the windows were not made of movable glass like they are nowadays. There were simply apertures of varying sizes in the house's walls, and you'd plug them closed at time. So is that plugging, a button or not? So it's So when we say basically even if it's an object that's not categorized as a keli, as a kli, talking about a general term with various meanings, implement tool, implement container. The Kaf HaChaim says that a kli, even used for a task forbidden on Shabbos, can be used as a plug to plug a window, even though it wasn't designated as a plug for a window before Shabbos. For such a kli may be carried to be used to perform a permissible task. So it's not muktzah, you're allowed to move it. Even though Bechlal, the thing on its own is muktzah, because it doesn't have use for Shabbos, but now you're using it for something on Shabbos. So now this is the first time you're going to use it for such on Shabbos, as we said in Shulchan. An object that is not categorized as a kli is deemed muktzah and is forbidden to be carried on Shabbos. So in this sif, the Alter Rebbe has explained how an object might otherwise be categorized as muktzah may still be removed from that category and permitted to be carried on Shabbos. So next note is that so he said he's allowed to so it's still day or whatever. So he thought of using it while it was still Friday, so he's allowed to carry and plug the window with it. The Magen Avraham states that a person is permitted to close up a window when there's a halachic significance to his act. For example, there's a corpse in a room and a window connects that room to an adjoining room. If the window is plugged, Kohanim will be able to remain in the adjoining room. If it's left open, it's forbidden for them to remain there. Magen Avraham maintains that the window may be plugged closed even in such an instance. And then again, we said, as it says in Shulchan, because as the Alter Rebbe says, that you can use an object that is not a kli to be categorized as such by thinking about using it for a permitted function, which is commonly designated. And that's it for this paragraph. So now we're saying, it's even next paragraph.
Okay, next. Vafilu aruba shebagag mutar livkaik ba'apikok hamutar betiltel. Even a skylight, right? A window in the ceiling, you are allowed to close with a closing thing that you're allowed to move. Meaning, again, like we said before, using the same rules before, that either you've designated it before mentally or you've used it before for such a purpose, whether or not specifically you designated it's going to be used on Shabbos, but you designated it that I'm using this as a window cover. Even if it's not tied there or connected there when it's still day, like we learned before that there's actually it's really later, but before we learned it before, but it gets in the Mechaber with Mishnah Berurah, it comes obviously going to be later in this Siman that some things you have to tie it there. It has to be tied in place to show that it's that's its use, to make it very clear that it's use. But he says no, even though it's not tied there, it does not have to be tied there. So why is he telling us this thing about the skylight? Because there is, like we said, there is when it comes to putting up a temporary, right? But when you're not allowed to build a permanent thing, not horizontal and not vertical. However, when it comes to temporary things, you're allowed to put up a vertical partition, right? That's temporary, so long as you're not creating a halachic domain, meaning like you're not making the sukkah kosher by doing that, or etc. And on the other hand, a horizontal partition, even temporary, is called an oyel. It's a tent. You're not allowed to put it up even temporary. So that's why the Alter Rebbe's question here, not just Alter Rebbe's question, but the question here is why is wait a second, how can you put up a horizontal covering? It's a tent, right? So he says this does not make it making a tent at all. Why? Why? Because he is only adding on to an existing tent. So if there was no window and you're putting up a temporary, even a temporary structure like a gazebo or something like this, I guess even an umbrella in theory. But are you putting up one of those those folding out gazebos with a top? You got a problem because you're making an oyel. In this case, the oyel exists, meaning the roof itself is already an oyel. And this is a temporary addition to an oyel. That's not meant to stay there for an extended time. Because it's a skylight. You're not trying to build a thing on this skylight. You're just trying to cover it, whatever it is, to keep out the cold, to keep out the sun a little bit. The sun is very strong that day, so it's not made as a regular as a lasting addition. You're made to open it with the sefes oyelar aimuteres, and a temporary addition to a tent is allowed. It's permissible. Like asru elo lasis kol oyelarai, and the only thing that they did not allow was to make an entire tent that's temporary. Like will be explained in 3:15. You can see the brilliance of my math skills. It takes me a second to add 9. It takes me a second to add 9 and 6. And therefore, if this covering that you're putting is not made to open on a regular basis, but only in far times, also leaf cake, then you're not allowed to close it up. In fact, even if it's the window in the wall, because you're putting in something, a permanent addition onto the wall or onto the roof. So both of these things are allowed. You're allowed to put up a temporary vertical partition. You're allowed to put up a temporary a horizontal partition if it's in addition to an existing tent. However, if it's not temporary, you cannot do it. Notes.
Not on its own. Excuse me. So even though it wasn't tied down or hanging there while it's still Friday, okay, no, that's fine. So it doesn't make you're not making a tent which you're otherwise usher to do with regards to baina, because you're merely adding to it. The roof of the home already exists. You're just extending it over the skylight. Okay, here we go. So now, for this reason, if the plug is not designated to be open frequently, so we'll see the Alter Rebbe says in Kuf Kuf Yud Tes Sif 4, so 519 Sif 4, which defines being open frequently as being open every day. So note though, the Pischei Teshuvos, however, says over here, and our Shin Yud Gimel, he explains that if the nature of a structure is that the plug is opened every day, it is not removed from that category, even though in actual practice, several days pass without the window being open. And it doesn't actually have to be opened every day, as long as it's how it's made is to be opened every day. It's made to be regularly opened. Just because, for example, just because there are people who have, they never use their front door because they use the back door because that's where the driveway is, or the side door or whatever, but it's still made to be used every day. Just because they never use it doesn't mean it's not built as such. So the same thing with this plug, and that's it.
So it has to do with what its regular usage would be, rather than if you actually did it.
Yeah, that's what the Pischei Teshuvos says. The Alter Rebbe later is basically, what does it mean frequently? So we're just saying here, we just said frequently. So the Alter Rebbe later defines frequently as opened every day,
which is interesting, because that's a very big difference from what we learned before. It was in the Be'er Halacha defined it as every 30 days.
Right. And what's interesting is that according to the Pischei, well, so hold on. So the Alter Rebbe doesn't say it actually has to be opened that often. It just says that's what we mean. It could be the Pischei Teshuvos adding on to the Alter Rebbe. That could be still within the Alter Rebbe.
Well, he didn't.
It just has to be built as such. It doesn't actually have to be used as such.
Actually,
but I would say even further, according to the Pischei Teshuvos, he doesn't necessarily even hold according to Be'er Halacha. He's not even necessarily saying it has to be opened every 30 days. Meaning it could go even longer than 30 days without it being used.
Perhaps.
But as long as it's built, the nature of it is that it's built in this way. So who cares? Even if you left it, I haven't opened that door in 6 months. It's still a door that is built to be opened every day.
You can still apply the thing of when is it made to be open and when is it not made to be open. Or you could say that they don't argue, and one is talking about when it's made to be open, and one is talking about when it's actually opened.
Right. Well. So you can say the Be'er Halacha is saying even if it's not made to be opened, but if it is opened every 30 days, it takes on this frequently open status. Meaning, even though it's not made as such.
Right.
I think Be'er Halacha might be talking about that. But either way, it's an interesting point.
And anyway, it's something to think about, because it's something that Bichlal, like in both the Alter Rebbe as well as the Mechaber, it's not specified specifically. Now he specifies it later, the Alter Rebbe, that's what it is. And the Be'er Halacha would be interesting just to kind of think about what it is they're talking about and how they compare with each other. Because on the first glance, that's a big difference in 30 days or 1 day. Yeah. Anyways, anywho. Save base. The Ganesh is nailed by. Now a rod that you prepared it to use as a lock, that he puts it into a hole that is on the side that's next to the door, right? So let's say the door opens inward, and you put inside of the door, you have a hole, and you put a rod in there. So now it blocks the door from opening inward. He does not need to tie it to the door before Shabbos, when it is still day, before Shabbos. That even if he doesn't tie it, and it's not hanging there from before Shabbos, then even not only that, and even if he doesn't leave it there, he doesn't like stick it in before Shabbos. He doesn't stick it into the hole before Shabbos. There's no this does not constitute building on Shabbos. Being that it's not an item that you would leave there, right? Like we know that any kind of kli, any kind of vessel, we assume you're not going to leave it there. But it's made to go to put it in and out on a regular basis. Mikol makim, However, it is a little bit more similar than our prior case of closing up a window or a skylight. And therefore, so therefore, even if he thought about it before the day that he's going to use it for this purpose on Shabbos, even if not only did he designate it to use it like this but he designated to you that this is it. This is a lock now. From now and forever, this is a lock. Even if this is the lock, he uses it all the time, even in the weekday. And it's and this is designated for this. This is the thing that they use to lock the door. Also, lin el Shabbos, he's not allowed to use it to lock on Shabbos. Elo imkain, unless tikna iva also by ma'aseh he fixed it and did some sort of action and prepared it for this. The inyan shetikunay meichiach olav shehu aimen lekach, in such a way that it's that the modification that he did on it is like shows clearly that this is what it's for. Because then it's recognizable, this thing that he doesn't leave it there. But rather it's clear that it's made to go in and out on a regular basis, right? Meaning, because what are we worried about? We're worried about it looking like building. So it's very important that it's recognizable that you're not leaving it there for an extended time, but rather it's made to go in and out. That he's proving that then this adjustment modification that he made, it shows that it is a vessel, and it's not the usual way to do, to take a vessel and to leave it there for forever, because that's for building materials, not for vessels. Vessels you don't do like that. And then he is allowed to do this even if he never closed it, even if he never used it. Just like we said before, that if he designated it mentally but never actually used it for that by the window, it was fine. In this case, the same thing, only mental designation is not enough. He has to do a modification that makes it obvious that this is now going to be used for this purpose. And then even if he never used it this way, he's allowed to use it. And you're also allowed to move it around. Even not for the need of a secondary use or its place. Meaning, what the Alter Rebbe is saying here is it becomes a klisha melachti leheter. Right, it becomes a vessel which has a permissible use, which, like we said before, you're allowed to move even for its own sake. Even if I just want to put it away so the kids don't run all over it, or something like this, where we know that a kli shemalachta leisur, right, a kli that its purpose is not permitted. You can only use it for the secondary use or for the use of the place that it's in, but you cannot use it machmas atzmei. But here he's saying you can even use it machmas atzmei, not just letzedek atzmei, not just letzedek gufay or mekayme, not just for a secondary use and for its place. Just like any vessel which has a permissible use on Shabbos, like a spoon. Also, the taut like him said guf mekayme. However, if you're not allowed to use this as a lock on Shabbos, maybe he'll bring an example of this so if you're not allowed to close it on Shabbos, even though you generally use it to close in the weekdays, you're not allowed to move it besides for a secondary use or its place, because it is now a vessel that has a prohibited use. He might be talking about the difference between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. If you remember, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, there was a machlekes, there was a disagreement between them, that Rabbeinu Tam held that you only need modify the lock for the use of a lock alone. Rashi held no, you have to modify it. Not just, it's not enough that you modified it to use the lock. You have to have modified it for some other use as well. And if you remember, the example that he used was the olive branch, or the olive mixing rod. So, and there's a big difference between those two things. There's a nafkamina, right? The difference of law is that according to Rabbeinu Tam, that you're using it for the lock, then it comes out, this first thing that the Alter Rebbe said is that is of a vessel with a permissible use, whereas if you made it into an olive rod, it is now a vessel that has a prohibited use, and you can't use it for its. You can only use it for gufa your mekayme. However, you can't use it for just any reason at all. Notes.
So, okay, so we said it doesn't have to be tied to the door during Friday. So the Alter Rebbe then goes on to describe Bechlal, several types of makeshift bolts, discusses when it's permitted to use them, when doing so is forbidden. The bolts commonly used for doors at present are designated for that purpose, and they're attached to the door frame. So even though everything we've said, it doesn't actually apply to our, door bolts and locks and stuff. So there's no difficulty in using them on Shabbos. In the instance at hand, we're talking about tying the bolt to the door, would certainly indicate that then the rod was intended to be used for that purpose. So nevertheless, the step is not necessary. You don't have to tie it to the door to designate it as such, because on Friday you designated it yourself. So I'm saying you don't have to. Yeah. Right. So we said that we make it a permanent part of the building. So this phrase is used as a translation of the Hebrew mevatloi sham. There are two halachic difficulties in using these makeshift bolts on Shabbos. Aleph, unless the object uses a bolt as a kli, it's muktzah. And Bay is inserting the bolt into the wall or floor of the doorframe resembles building. Again, we're not talking about the regular predetermined lock. We're talking about doing it in this way. Yeah, it could be like you're building. You're putting it. You're attaching it to the wall or to the floor. By designating it or using the object as a bolt before Shabbos, then you're able to resolve the issue of muktzah. The question, though, is whether or not the bolt is still boina. And that's what we proceed to then discuss and in this sif and later sif.
So in other words, you have two concerns. You have muktzah, you have does it look like baina? Yeah. Now, even once you've eliminated, your question of muktzah,
he seems to say, Mom, you're right, resembles building. You're right. It's still
well, he said it's not actual baina. Right. It's in fact, that was the thing that even when he's saying baina, even like by the Mechaber, when he uses the term baina, it's clarified that I think the Be'er Halacha, however, clarifies that it resembles Beinam. But in other words, so even once you've eliminated the idea of muktzis, I eliminated the problem of muktzah, I'm good. So no, because here you have an additional concern. So fine, now that you've eliminated that, you still have to eliminate the fact that does it look like Beinam?
Right.
Yeah.
So then, and along those lines, the next note, because we said, this is a slight closer resemblance to Baina than plugging up a window or skylight. Why? Because the rod is inserted into the wall of the building. In contrast to the objects used to plug a window that are not inserted into the building. It's in the gap of the wall. It's not actually into the inner working of the building, so it's less like Baina. And then I think that was but you know what? So this is interesting. Basically, as we says, as towards the end, we said the halacha says replies to all other kalim used for permitted tasks. Right, as we said in Shin Ches, the modification caused the rod to be classified as a keli that is designated for a permitted purpose, for something that's mutter. And we said it's also permitted to be carried even for reasons other than use it for a permitted cast, or because one requires the place, as Rabbi Mendel says. So even a kli designated to be used for tasks forbidden on Shabbos, you could still move for such purposes. I mean, I need the place where it occupies. I need the space. Something's left on the table, for example.
Right. That's the classic example, yeah.
Yeah, classic example. Or one of the other examples I always think of is something is on your bookshelf in front of a sefer you want to get to.
Right.
I need the space. I need to get the book out, even if it's a lamp that's plugged in.
Right, which is it's a great example too, because it shows that, meaning that it's not just if like this muktzah thing is sitting on your sefer, it's blocking your sefer. It's you still need that place. So
Right. So where something on the table, there's actually laws of muktzah where the thing underneath it becomes busis, it becomes
right,
a
becomes a
basis,
base,
so to speak,
yeah.
to the
Right.
thing that's muktzah. Where the bookshelf, no, we're not talking about buses, it's not on top of the svarim, but it's just in front of it. I literally need the space to get it out.
Right.
Which and or yeah, not just bookshelves, but yeah, a lot of times people have in their kitchen,
Alternatively, you
in their
have,
kitchen cabinets, they have
alternatively,
appliances
you
that are in
have
the
a
way,
vacuum cleaner and it's blocking the door. I can't get out. I
literally
need to go
blocking
to
the
shul.
door.
There's a vacuum cleaner blocking the door. I have to get out.
Right, Erev Shabbos, you ran out of time.
Well,
Or yeah, appliances in a kitchen cabinet. I need the dish, the bowl that's behind
Yeah.
it. The appliance is totally. I have no use for the blender on Shabbos or the hot water thing or whatever. Like,
Right.
yeah, it's in the way. You can move it out of the way.
Now, it should be noted when we're saying you can move it out of the way, there is a whole set of halachas that regard that. Don't just go and do it. Make sure you know the halachas of doing that, and but which is not the subject matter here. But just
back to
so
this
you
when we're
know
talking
that
about
it's make sure you know the guidelines of what's considered a basis and what's not, and what you can move, and that's its whole own sugya. So. And in either case, even if we were talking about that sugya, as said many times before, they're not paskin halacha from here. These are theories and concepts of halacha. For actual halacha, you got to go talk to your local rav, especially since where this can get confusing because we're covering many different things. We're covering all the way going from the even before the mechaber through Rishonim, Achreinim, through etc. And we're talking about, for example, the Piskei Din of Mishnah Brura, which much of the world follows. We're also talking the Psak of the Alter Rebbe, which we're talking here, which Chabad follows. But in either case, make sure that you understand the halakha and minhag that you follow, and don't just go off what we're saying here. However, you can familiarize yourself with the concepts here. We're by Gimel.
Yeah, give it.
ונגר שהוא יוסיד שתכוון אייסי בחיר שבו אסקופה. Hey, I said it right this time. Nulina Odelis. So a neger, it comes, it's like a nagar, right? A nagar is I believe is a carpenter. So it's,
what's it called? What's it called?
There's nagar is a carpenter, and neger is a carpenter. It's basically a carpenter's peg. It's
On
like
on that note, I'm going to privately, that just struck a chord. I'm going to privately send you something.
Okay.
On that
Shahu Yasid, which it is a peg or like a dowel is probably what we would call it nowadays, a dowel, right? That you insert it into a hole in the door sill to lock the door, right? Meaning on the threshold in the bottom. Right? Since you stick it into the hole that is below, I very much appreciate how the Alter Rebbe is where we had to understand a lot of these things through notes before. The Alter Rebbe is very clear about the reasoning for these things and showing the difference between one and the other. This is more similar. Right, he started out with a window, then he went to the rod, which is more similar to building. Now this dowel that you put in a hole that's on the bottom, it is even more similar to building. Why? Because the rod you put in from the side, whereas this one you put in on the bottom. The ein nayalim boy, and you do not usually use this. Why? Because the rod in the side, it's more usual that you would do something like that to close a door. However, this ain't nail in bay. It's not usual that you would lock a door this way. Even so, therefore, even if you have designated it for this, the af im tiknai, not just did you designate it for like by the window, but af im tiknai v'aseh b'mayisa michiach alav shel eimen lekach. But even if you went ahead and did what you had to do by the rod that goes in the side, and you've modified it in such a way that it's standing for this purpose, it's not enough. Because it looks more like baina because you're putting it on the bottom. So you must tie it there when it is still day, meaning before Shabbos. The oz mutar lin elbei, and then you can lock with it. Even if you never used this to close ever before this way. And even if you didn't mentally designate it, meaning, on the one hand, you have a stringency, you have to tie it, right? But that tying it itself also already automatically acts as a designation for the purpose. So the tying, right? You're tying it for what reason? Because in order to take it out of being looking like building, like baina, like the malacha baina, you have to tie it, right? But that automatically also covers your problem of muktzah, because you're tying it, designates it so that it shouldn't be muktzah. So it shouldn't be, because now it has a permissible use on Shabbos. Why? That now that it is tied there, when it's still day, it no longer looks as if you are building on Shabbos. And as said before, you're tying it there also takes it out of, so it covers both of our concerns, both of looking like baina as well as of being muktzah. Notes.
No real notes. One is just that kosher means tied, and we're saying even by you attach it to the door by a chain, a string, anything really. So yeah, that's it.
Dalit. Ketzad kosher. How must it be tied? So, how must it be tied? That depends. It depends on the nature of the peg. If it has a bulb on the head, that meaning that the top is wide, and it is now able to be used as a pestle with which you can crush and grind peppers, right? Like black pepper, comes in little balls, and you smush it with a pestle. Well, nowadays we don't do that as much, unless we're really fancy schmancy. But if it is fitting to be able to do this, since it resembles a kli, it resembles a pestle. And by the way, it would seem that he's talking about here, because we had this discussion before also, but it would seem that he's talking about here where we're not talking about an actual pestle, that you're not using an actual pestle. If you're using an actual pestle, it's an actual kli.
Right. It just says no. It's a peg. It's a peg, but it's a peg that is fit to be used as a pestle.
That is fit to be that it looks like it can be used.
And then again, the language being, and since it resembles a cleat, not that it is a cleat, that it's a pestle. It's a peg. It's fit to be used, and since it resembles a cleat,
it does not look like. And our whole problem here, remember, our problem here was never if it's building. If does it look like building, and so therefore it doesn't look so much like building. By the way, meaning not in comparison to the things above it. It looks more like building than all the things we already spoke about, the rod and that. However, compared to the next peg we're going to talk about, it looks less like building. And like we said before, it is unusual to leave a kli, to leave it sunken into the building, and to be mevatel it there, to leave it there. Therefore, it does not need to be a strong tie. It does not need to be strongly attached. But even if it is tied with a thin string, that is not strong enough to hold it, שאם היה רוצה ליטלי משם או לטאטלי או לחבל זה, מיד היה נפסק די בכך. Meaning that it's so thin that if you were to pull it out with this string and suspend it on this string, it would snap. It's not able to it's not a functional string that you could like pull it out, that like when you're ready to pull it out, you'll pull it out. If you try to pull it out, it would snap. In fact, even just its own weight could possibly snap it. It is still enough. Why? Because again, remember, it's not about is this binyan or not. It's all about what it looks like. And so this string is enough to give it to give that additional impression needed that it shouldn't look like I'm building. Afilu in eine kosher badelach atzma, even if it's not tied to the door itself, ela bevriach hadelis oy ba mezuzah, but if it's just on the beam of the door or in the door posts. Sha'af she'ein hadavar nikor kol kach shekosher sham beit yom b'shvil ni'ilas hadelis, even though it's not so recognizable that it's tied there before Shabbos so that it should be a lock. Hoyel ve'enid kosher b'delach atzma, being that it's not tied to the door itself. The gam hoyel ve'ena kesher ametz, and even though it's not tied there in a strong way, afal pichein einu nira kebeina b'Shabbos, therefore it does not look like building on Shabbos, hoyel v'hu doimel kli, since it resembles a vessel. And even if it's a long string, and this peg is not hanging in the air at all. It's not suspended, which, I mean, not only that, we're talking about a string that might not even be able to suspend it, right? Right, when he moves it out of this hole that's in the doorway. It's the whole thing is laying on the ground, and then there's a thin string trailing from it to the doorpost or to the door beam. No problem, no problemo. So long as it was tied there before Shabbos with this string. Notes.
Yeah, the only note is basically the fact that when it says it's lying entirely on the ground, what does that accomplish? It's showing that it's clear that the peg is intended to be used as a bolt, and it's not for, if it's lying on the ground, that means it's not for building. It's supposed to be put in and out.
Yeah.
If it was in place,
right, then
okay, maybe it's part of the building. Okay, it looks like it's supposed to be part for building. It's in its. If it's stam laying out, no, it's supposed to be loose. It's not. For, okay. Hey.
By the way, there is a figure here, and actually I Lefia Nius Daiti, right? In my humble opinion, I think that this figure is actually completely off, because the way he's showing it is actually not, even a non-bulbous one would be fine, because if you look the way he's showing it, it's almost like it's tied to the door as a mechanism that you can move it up and down, which as we learned is actually, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just a thin string that's just connecting it, but is actually serving no purpose. If
it's actually attached, then of course it's okay.
Right. In the case of what this figure here is showing, it's actually, I believe that this is a misled. I believe they either used the wrong figure in the wrong place, or the author of the figure got confused with a different scenario. But this figure actually is not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's from some months ago. Yeah.
In fact, almost the identical. It was almost the identical figure that was used in the Mishnah Berurah to explain the. There was a note about, however, if we're talking about one that's actually connected to the door with a sort of mechanism, that's not a problem. I believe it was almost the identical figure that was used for that.
Exactly.
So anyway, but since we're not on share screen, ignore the figure. Don't worry about it. Maybe I should send it to Harav Ashkenazi though.
Send it to me.
Who's compiling a list of errors that he found in the thing, because I believe this to be a such an error. Anyway, by the way, if we keep doing this, we're gonna this Shulchan Aruch is gonna get really refined, and By the way, that's one of the things too. Is that which. See, it's funny. I'm more concerned when it's these kind of this kind of sefer that's actually meant to be used halacha l'maisa.
Right. It's meant to be used like
If
and
it's
it's
like
meant to be used for everybody, meaning
right,
for
like
people who are not going to look in
if
so
it's like
deeply.
if it's like in the they have like the Shulchan Aruch Mesivta that has the Shulchan Aruch Mavur, that has like the explanations on Shach and Taz or whatever. I found things where I didn't where I didn't like I didn't agree that that's what the Shach was saying or whatever, or Taz was saying, or but that's one thing. That's for lumdus. It's not for actually paskening din in a safe like this. Well, it's not for paskening, but this is meant for your general knowledge of what's allowed, not allowed, etc. So I think it's more important to not God forbid coming down. This is this is an amazing piece of work. But I think it is important that when such things are found that we feel could be a discrepancy, to send it in. And by the way, my understanding is they are very on top of like reviewing those things and refining it and making adjustments, etc. So that is if the peg has a bulb on top. However, if the peg does not have a glustra, meaning it does not widen on top, if it's tied even to the door itself, even if it's tied with a thin string that you cannot carry with it, that's fine. Is so long as it's tied to the door. Which, by the way, this is interesting because I don't think that was the conclusion that I had from when we were by the Mishnah Berurah. But if it's tied to the door itself, even with a thin string, although I think it may have been in one of the notes there, that the Alter Rebbe holds that, it's enough because it's obvious that that's the reason it's tied there, since it's atzma, since it is tied to the door itself. Even though it is a thin string, and so it no longer looks like you're building on Shabbos, even if it is not suspended at all and it's on the floor, but it's tied to the door itself, then that's fine. Avol, however, so unlike the peg above that has a bulbous head that can be tied also to the door frame. However, if it is only tied to the bar or to the door frame, it then must be a strong tie. It must be connected strongly. Meaning what? Meaning that it is tied there with a string that is strong enough to carry it by. When it, meaning it's tied well with a strong cord. Nikar hadavar, then it's recognized that it's made for locking the door. Even if it's not tied in the door itself. And then at that point, it already doesn't look like it's building on Shabbos. So even when you pull it out of the hole in the threshold, it's laying on the floor completely. So in all these cases, if it's laying on the floor is not of concern. However, with a bulbous head, it can be with a thin string, and it can be even tied to the door frame, either the top or the sides. However, in the case of the peg that does not have a bulbous head, it does not look like a pestle, or it does not look like a vessel. The vessel with the pestle, the flagon with the dragon and the pestle with the vessel. It's like an old movie from like the 60s or something. Anyways, but this podcast is not about 60s movies. It's right. About the Shulchan Aruch. So anyways, so if it is a non-bulbous head peg, which more resembles Baina, then the thin string only suffices if it is tied to the door itself. However, if it is tied to the door frame, it must be with a strong string. Notes.
No strings attached. It said no strings attached.
No strings attached, right?
So right, so we said it's more machmir if it doesn't have a bulbous head. Why? Because since the peg does not have a bulbous head, and now it doesn't resemble a kli. So again, we're going to be more stringent. The greater stringency is required because it's not that apparent that the peg will not be left as a permanent part of the building. So if the peg is, yeah, okay.
What's the chance you run into a situation like that?
That's it.
So what's the chance you run into a situation like that?
Nowadays, it's not like it's not a standard sort of thing that would happen every Shabbos. But there is such a possibility if you're in like Vase, you're in the I don't know, you're in the Boy Scout camp and the doors don't close so good. Or I mean, nowadays you have in Camp Gan Yisrael, that's sometimes there's no locks. The lock fell off at Vase. I remember when I was in yeshiva, this was something you would have to think about because I don't know, your lock fell off. It's from
in an Airbnb, you're in a place that doesn't have a lock and you want to make a makeshift lock or something for privacy. I don't know.
By the way, or sometimes you have houses, right, that they're made funny and they don't feel like bathrooms. Actually, in Ukraine, I remember in Ukraine, for the most part, bathrooms did not have locks on the doors.
Really?
Yeah, they just assumed you're gonna knock before you come in.
You mean the public restrooms?
No, not the public restrooms. In homes.
In people's houses.
People's homes.
In homes. Yeah, they just
slide. There's not even a thing to slide like on an airplane.
No, they just assume that you're gonna knock on the door. That you have two options: either knock on the door or open and go. Oh, close the door.
Right.
Whatever. That's that's your two options. But I mean, there's. But yeah, this is not in modern American life. This is not necessarily something that you would come across every Shabbos.
Right. You know what? That's smart in Ukraine because, in my opinion, it's not safe to lock the bathroom door. Why? As for Shalom, someone goes in the bathroom, they're in the top toilet, whatever, they don't feel well, they get sick, and the door's locked. And I know from the past experience, what do you got to do? You got to get that door unlocked. You're busted
right.
down.
I mean that wouldn't just be in Ukraine. That would be here in the U.S. too. I know. I see what you're saying. And by the way, that's why even in the United States, if I recall right, hospital bathroom doors do not lock. Or they could sort of lock, but it's a lock that you can pop.
Yeah,
in other words, the lock isn't an actual lock. It's a lock that can be popped from the outside very, very easily and very quickly. In other words, the lock is just to tell you, oh, somebody's in there. But if you wanted to, you can just hit this thing or whatever, and it would.
Not in JD's of the hospital. If there's a run to come out to an adjoining room on either side. And you go in to the bathroom from your room, you can lock the door so the people on the other side in the other room can't open it up.
Right.
So therefore, I think both doors can become locked there.
Yeah. Okay. So we did the notes.
Yep. All done.
Love. The whole Now, all of the above that we're talking about with a peg and how to make it not look like baina, not look like building, this is when the door sill, the threshold, right, is raised such that the hole does not go until the ground. The hole, like let's say the hole does not go all the way through into the ground. But if the hole underneath on the bottom, right, has become less, it's become reduced, and it reaches the ground. Meaning, what does it mean reaching the ground? That in such a way. Meaning we're talking about the first way could be either that, for example, the hole doesn't even go all the way through the door sill. Then you don't have a problem. Even if it got reduced, if the hole doesn't clear the door sill, you don't have a problem. It's not going to go into the earth underneath it. Or alternatively, if it's high enough that the peg doesn't reach to the bottom of the hole into the dirt, it's also not a problem. However, if the peg reaches and it pokes into the ground underneath, this looks like building. Why? Because he's going into the ground. The also and he is not allowed to close it even in any way, meaning it doesn't make a difference if it has a bulb, if it doesn't have a bulb, if it has a string, if it has a strong string, if it's tied to the door, if it's tied to the door frame, it's tied to the ceiling, it's tied to your car. No, cannot use it. No good, because it's going into the ground. And now it really looks like binyan. And you cannot, it really looks like binyan. I love rhymes. Even if it has a gluster on its head, the kasha does and it's tied with a strong string. When do we say this? When the peg is making a new hole in the ground every time you use it. But if in the first place he made a hollow in the ground, the place that the head of the peg reaches there, however, the peg does not add a hole in the ground, then it does not look like beina, and then go back to how he said before. If it has a bulb on the head, a thin string's okay. If it has if it's not a white if it's not the vessel that looks like a pestle, then it has to have a strong string and it has to be attached to the door, etc., etc. Notes.
On the one note, and that's it. It's just saying, as we said in 3 to 5. That's it. 7.
Right. So this is the bait, right? So that was just an addition to
As
3
you
to
said
5.
before.
That all the above is so long as the peg is not digging a new hole in the ground. A peg that you put a handle into the middle of it. And it's similar to a handle, which is a vessel. Mutar linel bay, you are allowed to close with it, to lock with it, af imhu naikiv ba'aretz, even if it adds a hole in the ground. The av she'ina kosher klo, and even if it's not tied at all, she'enai nira kebeina hel v'nikar shehu kli. Since it is recognizable that he is not doing building, because it is recognizable that this is a vessel. Meaning, let's remember that this is, so as not to get confused, the thing with the peg above it merely resembles a vessel. So you have to do more with it. In this case, since it has a handle on it, it is a vessel.
It's very clearly a keli.
Yeah, it is a vessel. And since it's recognizable that it is a vessel, therefore, even if it's penetrating into the ground, and even if it's not tied, it still does not look like building. He says it, I think, here. And it's not the same. You would say, wait a second, then why above we had the vessel that looks like a pestle? We had it that you would think they're the same thing. No, they're not similar. Why should they that pestle looking one was also similar to a vessel, but in that case, as we just said, it needs to be tied at least with a thin string, and furthermore, it also cannot penetrate the earth. So what's the difference here? In that case, it merely looks like a vessel. In this case, he made it into a vessel by because he took an action of putting a handle on it. And through this, he made it into an actual vessel. On the other hand, he did not perform any action personally to make that that peg with the glustera, to make that bulbous peg into a kli. So therefore, even though it resembles a kli and therefore only needs a thin string and does not need to be tied to the door itself, but even the door frame, however, it is not an actual kli. Where here, when you took an action with your own hands and you actually modified it, you turned it into an actual kli. And so too, habriach sheteichav in kotzel echad banakev. So too, a beam that you stick into, there's like a hole on either side in the wall, right? And you stick it into that hole, and then you stick it into that hole, right? If it has a ring in the middle, that you hold it, right? You grab it by the ring, right? And then you pull it this way, and then you move it out, and you pull this way, right? And so it has a ring. It's used as a handle. And you pull the beam with this ring. It is a handle for the beam. And you're allowed to use it as a lock, even though it is not tied at all. What is interesting is that he does not specify by the beam that you physically took that action. Whereas by the peg, he said that you specifically made that action. Maybe it doesn't mean you have to have made that action, but it means that it has to have specifically have had a handle added to it for the purpose of making it a kli, rather than it being meaning that whoever made the wide peg didn't make it for this purpose. It merely looks like this. Whereas when you have a peg with the handle that was a handle has been specifically added, even if you didn't personally do it yourself, but meaning it came for this purpose. It was made with a handle for this. Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe the beam that goes in the wall is different because it's not being put in the floor. So maybe it looks even less like Baina. So I don't know. Maybe the notes will clarify. But I find it interesting that by the peg, he says he specifies that you had to have taken the action of putting the handle on, and by the beam that goes into the wall holes, he does not specify that you put on the handle. He just said that it comes with a ring. Notes.
There's something interesting. So the first part of the sif, we said the reason is because it doesn't appear that the person's building, right? It's clear because it has a handle that it's a kli. As Altanab said back in Bays, it's unusual to install a kli in a building and make it a permanent part of the building structure. Like that's because, I don't know. You might have a question. Okay, so what's a kli? I can't put it. It's a kli can't be part of baina. That's exactly what Altanab is saying. He's saying bichlal, that's unusual. It's not impossible. Yeah, you might find some funky artist who builds a house out of kalim. That's fine, right. But it's still not the usual way of doing things. Right. And again, we're talking about what it looks like. We're trying to get it just away from the result. Of course, if it's actual boina, it doesn't matter what you're using. If you're using a kli, I don't care. If you're using a coconut, a food to knock a nail into the wall to hang up something on Shabbos, that's boina. But no, we're just trying
that's a very important differentiation, because
trying to keep that in mind.
Everything we're talking about, we need to remember we're talking about in the case that you're putting it there temporarily. If you're not putting it temporarily, it is baina. It's actual the malacha of building. Now, if you're not putting it there temporarily, according to the Me'ikar Hadin, to the main, according to the basis of halacha, basically, you're not doing baina. But now we have this additional rabbinical problem that A, is it muktzah, and B, does it look like baina? But even if it doesn't look like baina, you still can't do baina.
You still, even if it doesn't look like, right? Perfect. So then, okay, the end. So then we were saying, okay, so it doesn't resemble, right? The bulbous head, etc. So the Kaf HaChaim says in 313.25 that if one performs an action and adds a bulb to a peg, it's considered as a kli, and the leniencies mentioned in this subsection apply to it. So if some way that like a bulb can pop onto a peg, I guess without that itself being boina somehow, but then yeah, that could be considered okay. Now it's a kli, and you could use it with all the kulas here. So then we said,
well, I think the differentiation there is that with the glustida, it's not that the bulb was put on there accidentally, but the bulb was never intended as a handle. That's the thing. Whereas in this case, you're intending this thing that you're putting is a handle.
The handle, yeah.
That's I think the differentiation between the two.
Right. So then the last part we said some of the laws apply to a bolt where one of its ends is inserted into a hole in the wall on one side of the door, and the other end is inserted into a hole on the other side of the door. So, and then there's an image for those who have the Shulchan Aruch Harav, is figure 14. But a marginal note appended to the original text of the Alter Shulchan Aruch brings up the question: how is this bolt different from the rod mentioned in Sif Beis?
Ooh.
And it doesn't give an answer.
I do believe that was answered in one of the notes in the Mishnah Berurah, though, wasn't it?
It sounds familiar. I don't have it in front of me.
Here, let me have a quick look. That would have been in Gimel, I think. No, it was in base. Or in Aleph. The base was what?
I think it's somewhere in Siman Shin Yud Gimel.
I think it was in base. No, it was in base.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, here. Let's see. It's note H here. That he has the bar in the wall, right? That the threshold has been worn down. If one initially made an opening in the ground, there's a place for the head of a peg, and the peg does not add a hole in the ground. There's no prohibition. This accounts for the practice in most houses where holes are made in the wall next to the door on either side, and a bar is inserted into the holes, running from one into the other. And we do not say this is like Bainah. For seemingly, what difference is there whether the ball is whether it's inserted into the wall or the ground? So it must be that because the holes in the wall were initially made for this purpose, there is no prohibition. It further stands to reason that since the iron ring is made in the middle of the bar and one grips it when opening and closing it, it is similar to having fashioned a handle, which is permitted. It would seem, however, that even if we follow this rationale, the bar would still have to fulfill the requirements of the rod discussed in passage 1, right? Which in the it was in Sif Aleph, which is also inserted into the wall. Thus, the bar would have to have been adapted as a kli from before Shabbos, either as an independent kli or according to a log, depending on Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. But if it has the ring, then it's automatically been adapted as a kli.
Right. I mean,
I think in fact, I'll go a step further. The whole thing there, like Rashi says, you have to have adapted it as a kli, right? In this case, it was already a kli. Is that you're not even adapting it into a kli? It was a kli made for this thing.
It was built as a kli.
So either according to Rabbeinu Tam, it's a kli that's already adapted as a log.
The end of Sif Beis,
it says
if it was modified.
He has the same
the end of
question
Sif
there. It
Beis,
doesn't seem like there's a like
the end of Sif Beis. It says the status of a rod once a modification has been done. Meaning you're allowed to lock it, even if you've never done it before the Shabbos, it was never done.
There's an
You're allowed to
adaptation.
move it, even if not machmas gufay or atzmai. You're allowed to move it.
But essentially, he's not contradicting what he said by the rod above. He could just be saying this is a valid rod, as we said above. That it has to be. Remember, the rod did not have to be tied. The rod only had to be designated as such as before. It had to be not just designated, but modified.
It had to have a modification. That's
okay, but this beam has the ring on it. There's your modification.
It has a built-in modification.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of the rod.
So you're saying it's the same as the rod that was modified.
Yeah.
So there is no difference.
No,
there's no difference.
Yeah, I don't think he's saying there's a difference. He's saying, now that he says v'chein habriach, and so too. In other words, perhaps all he's coming to tell you is that the peg, if you build a handle on it, it has the same rule as the rod that we spoke about above.
Yeah.
No, why bring it up at all? Just seems unnecessary.
Why? Because that beam with the ring is more similar to the peg that you've now put a handle on. The only difference is perhaps the beam you didn't put the ring on it. It has a ring on it. So
it should be
perhaps,
said.
So perhaps that's the thing is you don't have to have had the modification. It needs to have a modification on it that was made for the purpose of being a lock or of being a kli. It has a modification that makes it a clearly mamish a kli.
I think we should check out Rabbi Levkovsky's shiurim and see if he says something on this.
This would be the perfect thing for him to right.
Exactly. I could so see him, and I could so see him asking about this.
Yeah, this is he would very much. Yeah, this would be the sort of thing he would ask. I guess maybe we'll leave we can leave a voice note for Rabbi Librov as well to see maybe first of all, he would remember if one of the shiurim in the past cycles was on this topic. And maybe he could point us to if the shiur is on that, where it is. Ches.
Ches.
Kol Pesach she'enei osi l'knisav liyitzia tadin. Any doorway, any entrance that is not made for going in and out on a regular basis, but rather on infrequent occasions. For example, rechava sh'achri abatim, right? The yard behind the house. So obviously, this is not talking about nowadays you have perhaps back then they didn't use yards as much as they do in Florida. But in Florida, you have a yard with a mikveh, with a big giant mikveh in the back, etc., etc. So you have you use it much more frequently. Interestingly, my yard we almost never use at all. However, the doorway to our yard is not considered such because it is also a side entrance, and that's how we take out the garbage. And so we do go out, but the yard itself, it's
that side back door that when I come to go to your basement.
Yeah. So right, I'm saying, but that so there's that yard there. We never use that yard. But okay, but the door is not. It's a frequently used door though. It's a normally used door. So. You don't go in and out frequently. If you made for this opening a door, which does not, that's another difference, by the way. The door to my backyard is a clearly recognizable door.
A regular door.
With a door handle
and
with hinges, etc.
Like the example I got before of people who might not use their front door for months, even they never use their front door. They're always using their back or side door. It doesn't matter. It's still very clearly a door. Right. Here we're
Right.
saying, yeah, if it's not
Right.
a regular door,
Right. So meaning so he made a door that does not go on hinges, meaning it's sort of like a makeshift sort of door. But it's not really makeshift. It's meaning that you're not really using it as a door. You're using
put
it
it
to
into
plug up a
place,
hole.
and then it like locks into
Yeah.
place or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. If you need a little bit, well,
Pe-
which honestly, that reminds me more of there are some they have some of these like some of these doors, well, less so much doors, but sometimes you see the like big standing walls, like these glass walls, like in like the back of houses, that they're not on hinges, but they can pop out so you can bring in big furniture.
Right.
So they're not meant to be regularly opened, but they
Right.
can pop out in case you need to bring in a large piece of furniture. They can
Right.
kind of like, pop out of their place so you
Right.
can.
So in other words, they have some sort of mechanism, almost like double hung windows or something like that. That like you
There's
can
some sort of bolts or
pull a
whatever. Yeah,
thing
like
out, pull a thing
exactly.
out. Yeah.
Like the window. Yeah, exactly. The
Right.
window kind of can pop out of
Right.
its frame.
Yeah.
Right.
So Pirush Tzir, the meaning of tzir, of a hinge, is eitz chad, a sharp wood, a beilit min adelis, that sticks out of the door, lachnisei b'chir sheba eden, to put it in a hole that is in a socket, kedei shtei adelis kizeres lekon lekon, so that the door can swing this way and that way. So this one does not have such a thing. It does not swing on a hinge, but rather when you want to close with it, you put it up, you lean it on the hollow of the opening, but to close it. Whether it is made out of beams, or if it's like a curtain of reeds that he hung it there, and he put it up to be a door. Also the opening of a courtyard. What's pirza shebagina? The opening of a garden, or the opening of a courtyard. That he fenced it off with thorns. He made a fence with thorns. And he made them like a door. And sometimes he opens it, and he opens and he comes in and out. Right? And from this door, this at infrequent times, and then he locks it up again. So what is the rule with such a door? If they have a hinge, it doesn't have now a hinge, but it once had a hinge. And it broke, and its place is recognizable, meaning you can see it's recognizable that it had a hinge. Mutter little behem Shabbos, then you're allowed to close them on Shabbos. Mipnei shebeheker hatzir shebehem nikorin shehin delosis asoyis v'sekanila, that through the recognizable hinge or place of a hinge, it is recognizable that it is a door which is made for opening and closing, right? Even though you don't go in and out of there frequently, but it's made to go in and out of. So it's fine. It does not look like building. But you still have to be careful. If it does have a hinge, you cannot put that hinge back in its place. Why? Because the Kameshi's brother will be explained. Because that is actual building. However, if it does not have not a hinge and not a recognizable place of a hinge, also, you are not allowed to close it on Shabbos. That since it is only made for infrequent use, so when he is putting it up, it looks like he's making a what do you call it, a lasting a thing of permanence. Kol she'ein b'hem heker she'ein dlasis, is so long as it's not recognizable that it is a door. So since it's not recognizable that it's a door, you got a problem, and you can't use it. Notes.
Okay. So there at the beginning we said the entrance, it's not used on a regular basis. And as we'll say in two seifim, different rules apply when an opening is frequently used to enter and depart a building. When the opening is used infrequently, closing it is more likely to be considered as building. But again, I think see if you had when an opening, meaning not a regular doorway, but stam an opening,
right?
Okay. So rather on infrequent occasions, the Kaf HaChaim suggests this means less frequently than once in 30 days. So again, the 30-day thing, like you said, the Be'er Halacha brings up. However, from the Alter Rebbe's wording in 519.4, we talked about it's not about the frequency, it's about how it's built. One might conclude this means that one must enter and depart through the entrance on a daily basis. See footnote 10 above.
Exactly what we were.
And he says right here, see footnote 10 above, where we quoted the Piskei Tshuva saying not necessarily, it could just be, it's about the structure of it, and not that you actually have to use it as such. But that seems to also be a tzarchim. Like, what does the Alter Rebbe hold? Does he hold that you have to use it every day, or
does he hold that it's made in such a way that it looks like it could be used every day?
Yeah, or not? Yeah, you're right. Even looked like it would be enough. You're saying, yeah, because we're just talking about mechse.
The whole thing is right. Yeah. Meaning, it's not about if you're the example again. Let's go back to my back door. Let's say I took the garbage out the front. Right, and I didn't use it at all. But it's recognizable. It's a door.
Yeah, it's right there. That's what it is. It's a door.
And so what if I didn't use it every day, or if I didn't even use it every 30 days? Let's go a step further. Let's say I didn't use it every 30 days.
That's what I'm saying. Like the front door I'm talking about. People don't use it for months, years. Right. They never use the door, but it is there.
So it would really seem like the whole thing is about what is it?
The door's not. They didn't put anything in front of it. It's not blocked. Right. It's not, still functional.
So I think it really comes down to the recognizability. Is this the type of door that could be used? And again, like I said, it is interesting that again he brings up who was it that said 30 days? Yeah. Or versus the Alter Rebbe that says 1 day. Are they even talking about the same thing? Is he talking about impression? Is he talking about that you have to actually use it every day?
This we'll see more when we get to 519. But anyway, so in any of the above instances, it says there's a hinge on these doors. The note brings up, even if the door is not presently attached to the door frame with this hinge. Like I said, even if they do not have a hinge on this time. Meaning,
so there's the difference. There's the big difference between my door and their door. My door is attached with the hinge, whereas these doors are not attached with the hinge. But I think that comes more in the next sif also. But
yeah. And we say at the end of that paragraph, as will be explained, we're going to see in Tesvav and Yud Zayin. And then finally, we ended off, since there's no indication that there are doors. Similarly, opening these doors, these quote unquote doors, would be forbidden because one would appear to be demolishing a permanent structure. Okay, let's quickly do tests.
Okay, even if it has hinges. It's only permitted if you tied it and hung it before Shabbos. Even if it drags on the ground, and then when he closes it, he has to pick it up and put it there. But it's tied. Just like we have by the peg. The fact that it's tied, that it's tied to the doorway, it shows that it has something to do with that doorway. It's a door. So therefore, it does not look like building on Shabbos. If you tied it there, however, in such a way that when you open it, it's not hanging on the ground. Even if it is only a hair, like the fullness of a hair above the ground, So there's a further thing with my door. My door is on hinges. It's tied to the doorway. Even though it's tied with those hinges, but it's actually connected and it does not touch the ground when you open it. So that's another thing that makes it clear it's a door. So mipnei she'ein nira kibein b'nozul, because it's you're not picking it up off the ground and putting it on a thing, but rather you pull you're let's say you have it tied above it, it like swings up and down or something like that, right? Like like a doggy door or something like this. Fine, but it's recognizable that it's a door even though it has no hinges. Since even when it's open, even when it's not closing the door, it's connected and it's established there well. It's affixed there in such a way that it does not drag on the ground. Notes.
There's one note here. So it says, we said the person does not appear to be building when closing these doors. Since the doors are attached in a manner where they do not drag on the ground, they appear to be part of the building. Thus, the person does not appear to be adding something new to the building when closing the doors. Okay, I think we can squeeze in Yud.
Yeah. Pesach. So that all the above we were talking about, a door that is infrequently, that is, and it's interesting because it says a door that is made to go in and out regularly, right? Mutil nale, you can close it out. You can lock it, right? You can close it. Afilu b'deles she'ein laha ketzir, even if it does not have a recognizable hinges, right? V'hi nigreres ba'orish shepeischa, and even if it drags on the ground when you open it, afilu shemtin eisa legambri kishepeischa neisa she'ein kshura sham klal. Even if when you open it, it's not tied at all, meaning you remove it completely. Being that it is made to open on a regular basis. So therefore, like we said before, you are allowed on Shabbos to make a temporary partition. That's vertical. And this is temporary because it's made to go in and out on a regular basis. And there is no prohibition of making a vertical temporary partition on Shabbos. Besides, for again, don't do this because we said this. This is not made for you to pass an halacha according to, because there are rules that regard that thing also. Where this is not the place where we're talking about that. But note that there are specific rules to mechitzas, to partitions that are temporary. And how
I was gonna nitpick on your wording of only what you call it partitions, only vertical. It's not. You can make any type of partition on Shabbos. The problem is when you make one that's overhead, it tends to be that you're making a tent, so it's baina. But if there was some way that you could do that without it being baina, it's allowed.
Well, you could. You could.
With regards to, for example, one of the notes is that with regards to plugging up a skylight, that's a way of you're making a partition, but without actually making it baina. And then the other note, so we said the last note being, so in that source we said in 315, the Alter Rebbe explained the construction of a temporary partition is forbidden only when it has halachic significance. For example, to serve as a wall of a sukkah, etc. So like we said, something that's halachic or to make some sort of eruv. So you can't be doing that. That means it has significance, so that means it's more permanent. All right, Yeshkef.
Yeah, so all of the above we were talking about in a doorway that has a bottom threshold. The next time in Mitzvah Hashem we will continue. How about if the door does not have a bottom threshold? That will add additional problems. To be continued on the next time of the Shulchan Aruch Mitishpai, or whatever it is. The next episode. And good morning to everybody joining for the